Welcome to Generation Gap Broadcast 14. We'll look at the wide world of sports through the colorful eyes of our gang of six, ranging in age from 25 to 70. Together, we take you on a journey to sports heaven, discussing everything from the real to the nonsensical. We're family, and like in any family, when we don't all agree, well, things can get a little testy and personal. So here we go with our sportscast, uncorked, unvarnished, unrestrained, and unseemly, and utterly unlike anything you've ever seen before. Let's meet the family. Tonight we've got four folks for you. Starting from oldest to youngest, we've got Bob, yours truly, John, Bobby, and Benny. Okay, so let's dig in. 100 miles down the road from me in Monroe, Wisconsin, we have Milwaukee. Tonight, the Milwaukee Brewers are entangled in the first round of their Major League Baseball playoffs. There will be a big crowd tonight. They will be loud, and they will make a difference in that game. If you had any proof for that sort of thing, all you have to do is look at golf. Why golf? We're just coming off the big international competition, the Ryder Cup. The United States got spanked mightily by the European team, a team seemingly with inferior and less experienced players. It was an upset, or was it? Because if you look at the last 30 years worth of Ryder Cups, the United States has yet to win on European soil. Why is that? Why do the best golfers in the world, who are traditionally Americans, get thumped every 4 years when they travel to Europe? Well, you look at what goes on over there. One, you've got Europeans who truly, truly care about the sport. And they're fueled in a large sense because their fans really back them up. They make it important. You've got the strategic advantage of captains manipulating the golf course in such a way that they favor certain types of players. Still, you wonder, can't the very best players in the world overcome something like that? Then you watch on TV, it's very entertaining. You see all these seemingly strange characters dressed in all kinds of unsightly costumes, badgering the opposing team. Matter of fact, Bobby, when I looked at that, I thought there's tens of thousands of Bobbies in that golf crowd. Bobby, when you look at home field advantage, whether it's hockey, baseball, or even throw it over to golf, what do you see and what makes such a big difference that the hometown teams constantly are the preferred winners?
Yeah, I mean, you have the fans and the passion that they bring are certainly a big part of it. That's probably most notable in college sports, where you got the students really as the driving force of that passion and that energy. And, you know, if it's especially a big time rivalry game, you're going to be getting a rabid, home field advantage from the students, which can really carry a team. You see it in college basketball all the time, where you get big upsets when a team is at home playing a big rival. You'll see it, to a degree, certainly in college football, college hockey as well. College basketball seems like I see that the most as far as just big upsets are concerned. But then you got sports at the professional level. You look at the National Hockey League. Home ice doesn't seem to matter that much, even in the playoffs. We get all kinds of upsets, just like we saw this past season with Boston Bruins having an historic season going out in the first round. In the NHL, it doesn't really seem to matter that much unless it's like a Game 7 scenario. Then having that home ice for that, deciding game does seem to have an impact. National Football League, I think, is another example where, there's just so much talent out there. Anything can happen any week. You're not going to have a big home field advantage very often, unless you're a team like the Kansas City Chiefs that has the best home field advantage because the crowd is so good and so loud. But in the playoffs, it can certainly be a bigger factor. But NFL, I don't think it's nearly as big a deal as it is in college. You look at soccer. You, when you have the World Cup coming around every 4 years, the host nation typically overperforms what they normally would do. You look back at the Olympics that was hosted by South Korea. They made it all the way to the semifinal, which was much further than they've ever really gone other than that. When the U.S. hosted in '94, they advanced out of the group stage. We'll be hosting again in 2026, and I would expect that we'll have a decent run. And Also in qualifying for the World Cup, it can have a real big factor, especially with some of these smaller nations. You look at CONCACAF qualifying with that the U.S. plays in. They're playing road games in places like Honduras, El Salvador, Mexico. Really hostile crowds. Oftentimes, the playing surface isn't very good, or it could just be a drenched field, or it's just not really well kept, and so it can be kind of a slogging through game. You saw that when the U.S. was eliminated from World Cup qualifying by Trinidad and Tobago on the road. It was just a mess of a field. And then, the U.S. will take advantage of that too. When we play Costa Rica, we usually try to play them in a place like Denver when there's a snowstorm, and we have as much advantage as possible. So, certainly on the international stage, teams will try to make that as big of an advantage as they can. But I think ultimately, as you progress from the lower stages of sports up through professionally, I think it's less of a big deal. College is certainly important. I think high school home field is even more important, partly because the talent and expertise and experience of the refereeing crew is not quite as high. So they might be a little more swayed by home field fans, being loud. So it really varies by sport, but I think college sports, in my opinion, is probably where you see it the most.
Interesting. And, Benny, Bobby just raised the point about how home field advantage seems to make a greater impact on amateur athletes, at least let's say the college level versus the professional ranks. I look to the north here in Green Bay, which I think is kind of a college football environment. It's a wonderful place to watch a professional football game because the fans are so into it, and the fans themselves make a difference. It's kind of like going to Camp Randall Stadium when the Badgers have a big, Big Ten game. There's just a lot of energy in there. By the same token, if you look at a lot of professional sports teams, they seem to, at least in my opinion, gone the artificial route in terms of trying to create energy in the atmosphere of the arena. They play a lot of music. There's very little downtime from a sound standpoint during any point during the contest. Whereas with college games, it's quite different. And I think what's kind of interesting, to relate a little story here, but Wisconsin's opening football game, to stimulate fan interest, they actually hired the same consulting group that works for the Super Bowl, that creates all the music and all the rah-rah around the game. And for the Wisconsin's opener, many of the fans, myself included, were really upset that they used so much canned energy, canned music, and it was so loud and obnoxious that the fans were really taken out of the game. And it wasn't as much fun. And after a lot of feedback, now Camp Randall's going back to the way it was before, where the fans create the energy. And it just seems that there's this difference between fan creative energy versus what you see in the professional fields. How do you see that, Benny?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think that, there definitely are some arguments to be made that, the college environment has, a more energized atmosphere. People, I think, feel more connected to the teams, generally speaking, and it's a younger audience typically at those games, college students. I don't know if it necessarily makes a huge difference in terms of the outcome of games. I think that away players are going to be feeding off energy as well to a certain extent, whether they're getting booed or cheered on. I think generally speaking, I think there's a little bit of a placebo effect for fans. They want to feel that they're impacting games. And so I think people typically just imagine that, oh, if it's a home game, we're going to go out there and, we're going to have a huge impact. And generally speaking, I think it probably doesn't make much of a difference. There's probably a little bit of an advantage there. I think there's a few examples where I could think of where it probably would make a noticeable impact to a certain extent. Some of these colleges have pretty creative like free throw distractions going on at college basketball games. I could easily see how that could screw up a few players and make them miss a few shots. I think the biggest example in professional sports that comes to mind is just baseball stadiums and how each stadium's designed differently. So if one stadium is a little bit shorter and it's a little bit easier to hit home runs, that kind of affect the pitcher significantly, even especially if there are pitchers that tends to give up a lot of long balls. So that's something that I think can have a serious impact, because it's just if you're used to playing at a certain stadium, you're going to be keeping that in mind and playing it differently. And that can favor certain players, and teams, I'm sure, keep that in mind when they're attracting players to their teams. If you have you don't want to have someone that gives up a lot of home runs if you're playing at a place in a ballpark that is known for home runs. So, but overall, I think that it can be a little bit exaggerated. I don't see home field advantage having a huge impact in football games or basketball games or hockey games overall. I think typically, upsets can happen. I don't think it's necessarily because the fans there. I think it's just upsets happen in general. So, but yep, that's pretty much my take on that.
Okay. Bob, you're a seasoned sports fan. I'm sure over the course of time, you've seen a number of situations, at least with professional sports, where perhaps the home team use the physical attributes of their given playing field to their advantage. Perhaps in the football field, perhaps in baseball, the way certain teams set up their offense or defense based around the size of the outfield and the height of the outfield walls when it comes to hitting big shots or home runs. Bob, what's your take on how this all plays out?
Don't know how that happened. It's a great question. And I think a lot of this is situational. Baseball is a great place to start. Benny brought up the difference in stadiums and talked about how some teams shape themselves with that in mind. The Orioles are certainly a case in point. When the stadium at Camden Yards was built, the design was to make it friendly to Cal Ripken. Subsequently, last year, the Orioles redesigned it. They were giving up too many home runs, and they redesigned their left field wall, pulling it back and raising it. And it has changed the game in Baltimore quite a bit. And the Orioles have shaped their team to fit that. And pitchers are very mindful of the fact that it is much harder to hit a home run to left field than it once was. So this anomaly of course, very irregular stadiums in baseball is one of the driving aspects of this. You could also argue that your physical location matters. The ball's going to carry in Colorado the way it might not in some other places. So that's another factor. Looking at a spectrum of cases, I looked around a little bit to see where there was evidence of home field impact. I always believed in it as a kid. I mean, I remember the Baltimore Colts, like the Packers, were famous for really energized home crowds, and of course that got started in the day before all the artificial noise industry. And so that may have had an interesting impact. It never occurred to me, John, but I do sense you're onto something there, and the Badger experiment would seem to bear that out. Anyway, just some data points to toss out here. I looked at soccer, and that's come up in the World Cup context, and I looked at the English Premier League, and in recent years, home teams in the EPL have won just over 46% of their games. Now, mind you, 26% of the games end in draws. So that means that there's a significant advantage for home field. Visitors win only 26% of the time. So that appears to be as strong a home field effect as you'll see anywhere in sports offhand. In the National Football League in recent years, the winning percentage for home teams is only slightly over 50%. So it doesn't appear to be particularly consequential. It's there, but not by a whole lot. Then, of course, when you get to college sports, you've got to factor in some anomalies. Your Power 5 schools will play all their weak opponents at home, which, of course, is going to heavily inflate the home court, home field edge. And I do expect that, for, say, a visiting basketball team that is, ranked in the computer rankings, 100 spots below Wisconsin or an Indiana or whoever, that there's an intimidation factor playing on the road in a venue like that. And were they to play on a neutral site, and occasionally this happens, or if incredibly somebody does a road game, sometimes the result can surprise. I can remember when Tommy Amaker took over the job at Harvard as head basketball coach, and the University of Michigan decided to do him a favor by playing a road game at Harvard, and Harvard won. So there is certainly something at play. I think basketball is probably the best example of home court advantage. The fans are close, it's intense, it's personal. I think college hockey, much more than the NHL, to follow a point that Bobby raised, I think college hockey, there's a significant home field, home ice advantage for that same reason. I think some of this also varies according to the nature of the matchup. I think in rivalry games, the significance of home field is probably minimized. Now, I'd have to do a lot of data checking to see how well that holds up, but I did look at the Harvard-Yale series, just as one example, because they got a long track record. Overall, the visiting team has won slightly more often than the home team in the Harvard-Yale series. So that kind of plays with my perception over the last few decades, keeping track of Yale football. But that game has been quite unpredictable, and home field seems utterly inconsequential. Just one other note about sports. We don't talk about this one much, but cross country. Cross country team has a home course, and when they run a course, they know they're a little bit more knowledgeable than their opponents about how to run that course. Bobby might have a comment on that from his cross country days. So it works out a little differently at a lot of different venues.
Yeah, Leavenworth, we didn't have a home course. We just ran all away courses. So we never had an advantage, and we never won.
Well, that explains it right there. And you have to wonder too, though, with the perhaps as team athletes, as the athletes mature, they learn how to deal with the road environment a little better. Mm-hmm. Maybe younger athletes would, which is why it might affect, say, a high school kid or maybe a college athlete a little bit more. I do seem to recall that if you looked at Big Ten basketball conference games, this goes back a year or two, there was a pretty decided advantage to playing at home. I like that, and comparison, because it's not quite round robin, but it's close, and you don't have the influence of say the schools that are paid to come to your venue and take a shellacking. I would also wonder is to the extent that someone is, or an athlete is used to crowds, or used to having crowds root against them, and if that is part of the issue with, say, the United States Ryder Cup team in golf, that these particular athletes are just don't know how to deal with it when there's a crowd that is badgering them on the golf course. And it certainly must get in their heads, because you look at the performance of some of these athletes just totally tanked when they had the pressure of a unfriendly home crowd, opposing crowd. So it does seem that there's something to that. I know that the baseball analogy is a good one in terms of what you can do to build your team or set up your ballpark. I know in the NFL, it's probably less true now because you've got more high-tech stadiums and fields, but there used to be a real advantage to icing or watering down your football field before a really cold football game to basically put the other team on ice if they're a fast team. Certainly, there's an issue now with more football teams looking at getting away from the artificial turf and going back to natural turf. But the teams that play with speed like that. They like that artificial turf. It gives them a real advantage where they feel stuck in the mud when they're playing in grass. So anyway, it's an interesting phenomenon. I think there's a great psychological aspect to it as well. Okay, so moving right along in terms of the drinking element of our segment tonight. I'll start right here. Today I'm drinking vodka, and I think more and more, at least in the U.S., people have been going towards Tito's vodka. It's gotten very, very popular everywhere they go in the United States. But I'm going to go here with a little bit more of a throwback vodka. Absolute. You can see that or not. Drinking that a little bit tonight. It's delicious. It's one of my favorites, whether it's drinking it straight up or with a Bloody Mary. And I think it'll help me sleep pretty well tonight. How about you, Bob? What are you drinking tonight? You're a vodka guy. Bob, we got you on mute.
Having just returned from another major overseas trip, and we're trying to reverse the jet lag process, I won't need any help sleeping tonight. So I'm drinking some ginger ale bold.
Whoa.
Is
that
caffeine? It's also caffeine free.
Oh, wow.
And anyway, that should suffice for me this evening.
How would you describe ginger ale bold versus regular ginger ale?
I'll open it for you and do a live test. There we go. So I would say the taste is just a tad stronger, that the ginger taste, but it could also be one's imagination, but I'm presuming that they labeled it bold ginger ale for a reason, and it does seem a little bit more intense. I've always been kind of a fan of ginger ale since our grandfather, Fred, used to stock ginger ale like nobody's business at his house. You'll recall he was always ready.
That's right. Ginger ale and a pipe in his mouth.
That's right.
Pretty special guy. So Benny, you've been going international yourself. I know Shoshana was protecting you from Godzilla in the streets there in Hong Kong. So I know if you're going a different route in terms of Asian whiskeys right now, or what are you drinking?
So I was in Tokyo, and I'm actually battling quite a bit of jet lag right now, so I'm just drinking water. My stomach's been a little weird since the lack of sleep I've had. I've been trying to stay up all day and not take a nap, and so I feel a little sleep deprived. As a result, I'm not really feeling like trying to digest any alcohol. But I do, for a future episode, I do have some sake from Japan that I will show off. But yes, in the meantime, just going with normal purified water. And I'm wearing my Yokohama Bay Stars hat from the Japanese baseball game I saw in Yokohama recently against the Tokyo Giants. So,
Okay. Well, I strongly suggest if you didn't to try some of the Japanese whiskeys. They are known to be some of the absolute best on the planet. So, Bobby, I'm your dad and your brother are kind of worn out from travel. I guess not everybody's cut out for that kind of international thing. But you're kind of grounded, right there where it's all happening. And normally you've got something of substance to drink. So what do you got tonight?
Yes, so we are in October, and this is a Boulevard. It's called Bob's 47 Oktoberfest. And not my favorite Oktoberfest I've ever had. It's solid, but I've never been a huge Oktoberfest aficionado necessarily. But in October, it's a good change of pace every once in a while. So it's pretty solid.
Yeah, I'm with you. I like it, Oktoberfest beers. Actually, that's one of my favorite times of the year to drink beers now, because I kind of like the flavor of Oktoberfest beers. Nuclearis Brewery makes a lot of really good beers, but they also make a great Oktoberfest called Staghorn. And actually, before I got to our broadcast tonight, I was in Baumgartner's in Monroe, and I was knocking down a couple of Staghorns with a cheese sandwich. So I can't drink a lot of those, but they're pretty tasty when I do get to enjoy them. Okay, on to unique, maybe underappreciated sports. Bob, what'd you dig up for us for this week's segment?
Well, I was just in Armenia, which was kind of a sports desert, and it was moreover, it was overshadowed in the news by some military activities along their border with Azerbaijan, the cessation of territory, and waves of refugees flocking towards the capital city where I was. So not much of a sporting nature there, but there were things happening. I would be remiss not to note a couple of passings while I was gone. Buddy Teevens, the Dartmouth coach, whom we talked about a few months ago, passed away. His injuries were even more severe than many people realized. And there were a lot of tributes to him and his contributions to college football. Speaking of which, and relating it to our home field advantage topic, special occasions at some schools, like a homecoming game, are a big deal. Dartmouth always throws an extraordinary show for homecoming, with the big Friday night bonfire and so on and so forth. That is a spectacle that is almost unrivaled in North America. I took my grandson there several times to homecoming games for the bonfire and the game the next day. I remember it's 2018. Dartmouth was hosting Harvard. I'll give Dartmouth credit. They don't bring in usually patsies for their homecoming games. They would take their best opponents, Harvard and Yale, frequently for homecoming. And this was a 2018, a particularly nasty fall day. We had freezing rain and a wind, and I remember pregame. My grandson and I were standing in the end zone, which is approachable at Dartmouth games. You can get right up to the edge of the field behind the tape. And we were standing there watching him warm up. And what happened is Buddy Teevens walks over and says hello to us, and stops for a second and just thanks us for being there on such a bad day. And of course, I said, hey, we're just delighted, whatever. And we toughed it out. Dartmouth won the game. All was good. Alex never complained, so the day was a success, but kind of memorable. The other, of course, is Brooks Robinson, whose jersey I'm wearing tonight. Met Brooks a few times at card shows and things of that nature. And of course, the universal commentary about him is that in addition to being one of the all-time outstanding baseball players, it's also one of the all-time outstanding nice guys, and is deservedly much revered in Baltimore. Otherwise, no special sports stuff to report, though I will make an extra special effort for next time to dig up something interesting. I will note one game from last weekend. Of course, I didn't see it because I was gone. But in a New England intrastate rivalry, Harvard beat Holy Cross pretty decisively in a 38-28 game, which came as kind of a shock because Holy Cross was recently coming off a near miss against Boston College. They lost by a field goal at the very end of the game. And Harvard handled Holy Cross much better than Boston College did. So Harvard's quietly 3-0 and could be a factor this year.
Okay. Yeah, Brooks Robinson, the human vacuum cleaner.
Indeed.
You know, you look back to the glory days of pro sports in Baltimore. You had Brooks Robinson, and of course Frank Robinson eventually joined him. You had some other really great stars on that team, and you also had the old Baltimore Colts with Johnny Unitas. And
yep,
talk about the golden era in Baltimore. That was really it. You had really, really high quality athletes who were also just outstanding people.
And the other factor is that they were integrated into the community in a way that probably these days is matched only perhaps by Green Bay.
Right.
The Baltimore players, by and large, lived in Baltimore or right outside of Baltimore. They were part of the community. And of course, in those days, pro football players, pro athletes were regular guys. They did not earn salaries remotely like what they make these days. So they were ordinary folks in every sense of the word. Many of them had off-season jobs, tending bar and doing all kinds of other things.
Right, and it was rare that a local sports hero was traded.
That's also true.
A lot of loyalty from the organizations to keep those players in the fold because that was important to the fans. It's very different today.
Yeah, a different environment.
Everybody wants to be wants it now. They want to win now.
Yeah. And
there's not a lot of tolerance for young athletes learning the ropes or players going through a slump. It's just not tolerated anymore. Yeah.
And of course, free agency wasn't in full bloom yet either. But although in the 60s in the NFL, you had a choice to go to the AFL. But that was a special era, no doubt about it.
Right. Say, Bobby, not to say devolve into a different arena, but it brings up just an interesting, I'll say news bit this week out of Minneapolis, where PJ Fleck was talking about college player loyalty and basically making a big plea to Minnesota Gophers fans to please help him come up with NIL money, and that if they didn't, Minnesota Gopher football would become JV level. His words. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've never heard PJ talk that openly and directly about NIL. So it's pretty clear he's worried. And I think a lot of college coaches across the country are for schools that aren't bringing in a ton of NIL money right now. They're having basically the recruits recruited by other schools during the season, and are losing guys left and right. He basically said that Minnesota could become a AAA team if they don't get more money coming in. He even went so far as in his last presser on Monday to actually start advertising for some of the companies that are involved in NIL in the stadium. So when you go to Gopher football games, you can get one of the particular concession stands that sells burgers, and one of the beer companies that sell within the stadium. A portion of their profits go to NIL for Gopher sports. And so he was calling out those brands by name in his presser. And so that's really not his style. So it's obvious that he's feeling kind of up against the ropes with some of these bigger schools that are just having, huge donors just put in millions of dollars. It's going to be impossible to compete unless you have more of a grassroots campaign and try to get as many fans involved as possible. So yeah, it's something that definitely concerns me. I wonder if we're 5-10 years away from college sports, at least at the college football level and maybe college basketball, almost turning into a minor leagues and it just not being the same anymore and not being fun. Because if you're not one of the high spending teams, you have no chance. I mean, there's certainly a lack of parity to a degree right now anyway. But that's, I mean, I thought the ability for students to be able to transfer more and the expansion of the playoff was going to hopefully help parity, but this NIL thing may just drive it down so far that there's no coming back. Because I mean, the whole purpose of NIL is not what it's become. There's, the whole point was athletes to be able to make money off their name, image, and likeness. That's not what's happening. They're just getting money. And so it's kind of a shame what it's turning into. And I'm hoping there's going to be some sort of regulation around it, so it doesn't continue to spiral out of control. But I'm concerned with this.
Yeah, I think that concern is shared by a lot of college athletic directors right now. I remember years ago having lunch with Barry Alvarez when he was in Wisconsin, and he was talking about how he could see this is about 10 years ago, within 10 years that there would basically be one super conference for the NCAA of 60 teams. Well, you really look at it, the Power 5 conferences are really bringing in fewer teams than that. So we're well down that road, and recently read, I believe, in The Athletic, where they've talked about maybe 28 teams, schools can survive all this and field viable teams. And then I'm looking at schools like Wisconsin, Minnesota. They're probably right on the edge of getting in there, right? And I think that's one thing. I guess it's regrettable, but I tip my hat to Wisconsin's current athletic director, Chris McIntosh, for trying to make sure that the Badgers are going to find their way in that upper echelon and stay there. But Wisconsin does not have a lot of the advantages maybe some of the other schools do when it comes to just insanely rabid fans who are willing to kick in major dollars to support the teams. So big changes on the horizon.
Bobby, I want to follow up on something you said there, because something that you said about PJ Fleck in his post game interview mentioning brands, that to me is really disturbing. Because like the authenticity there of a human being, if every second they're mentioning, oh, by the way, I'm a little thirsty right now. Speaking of thirsty, if you like to drink stuff, how was he exactly saying the brands in the press conference? Like, how did it go? Did it seem really?
Yeah, I mean, he essentially said, if you're going to a good football game, stop by. If you want to help the go football program, because somebody asked him about NIL.
Okay.
Because he had made his comments, the week before about how it was becoming a big issue. And so somebody asked him about NIL and how fans can help if they want to, and he said, "Well, this is how you can help. You go if you're going to the game, this burger stand is." Some of their profits are going to the NIL Collective. Duck Beer is the name of the beer company that's also involved. And a portion of their profits go to the NIL Collective. So yeah, he was essentially just saying, if you want to help, this is how you can do it. Get a burger and wash it down with a beer.
Okay. So he's not necessarily doing like full blown advertisements, but he's mentioning.
No, it was just within the realm of the press conference.
Yeah, but it could become that way where it's advertisements. Because I feel like, especially in today's age with the internet, more and more people are being tangled up with brands to make money and to compete to try to make money in pretty much any sphere. And so it does get to the point where you start to wonder, where does the person begin, and where does the brand begin, and to what extent is the person the brand, and who are they actually? So it's getting kind of in a territory where so many people are being involved in some partnership that it's hard to know who a person really is anymore. So
Yeah, and I think it's just partly the Gophers, I think, are just getting killed in NIL right now. It's Minneapolis, Twin Cities. It's a pro sports town, and you're not necessarily going to have the fire and vigor of fans to pour money into NIL collectives like you might be seeing at some other places where they don't have any pro sports. All they have is the college teams, and that's their life. So it'll be interesting to see how all that shakes out. And there are some schools that just have a mega donor, like Houston. They got the Mattress Matt guy or whatever his name is, who donated like $5 million to Houston basketball. And so every player on their roster is, making a ridiculous amount of money. It's just changing the landscape completely.
I will say that, at least from Wisconsin, a rivalry perspective, PJ Fleck is a shameless promoter. So although you've never seen him act like that, it seems like to the rest of us, this is very in keeping with PJ's personality and how he likes to build the reputation of the Gophers. But I've got to say, when I did not see that particular interview segment or Q&A with PJ, but the way you described it reminds me very much of, if you ever watch motorsports, and sometimes when it's over, they interview the race winner. And the race winner typically has a hat girl or hat guy next to them during the interview. And every 5 to 10 seconds, they put on a different cap, so they can take care of all those sponsors and make sure all those sponsors get their little piece of fame after the race. So, gosh, I hate to think that college sports is going down this road, but it just seems like it's just unstoppable right now. And I don't know where it's all going to end up. Pretty crazy.
I think we could see advertising on uniforms. I mean, more than just a Nike swoosh, but like you do in the English Premier League, for example. Where
actually, that did come up. That has come up. That may be something they can sell.
Yeah,
I don't know if the NCAA would try to step in to stop that, or where that would go.
I would bet money it's going to happen at this point. I think the floodgates are open. I think people are otherwise they're just going to abandon the NCAA at some point, because schools are not going to be able to compete with some of these SEC schools. Oh my God. It's like, how are you going to get the money otherwise?
No, it's true. It's a great point. Great point. All right, well, let's move on to predictions here. We're going to talk about the NHL. I'm not an NHL expert. It seems to me that's a fantastic sport, but every time I turn around, there's a new great team. Now, I'm still waiting for the Blackhawks to come back and bring back the Stanley Cup, and it seems like it wasn't that long ago they were good enough. They had a team that could do that. Bobby, it's kind of your golden segment here with the NHL. You want to walk us through predictions?
Yeah, so NHL season is about a week away from getting started. You mentioned the Blackhawks. They got the brand new superstar generational talent who's going to be making his debut this season, Connor Bedard, who was the number 1 pick last year's draft. They consider him to be in the same talent level as a Sidney Crosby, Connor McDavid type of guy. So I think the Blackhawks are going to be back in the conversation pretty soon. Probably not this season, but they're probably 2-3 years away. If they continue to develop some other guys around them, they could be scary quickly. Obviously, you have the defending Stanley Cup champion Vegas Golden Knights returning the majority, pretty much their whole roster. So they'll be looking to repeat and be the first team to do so since the Tampa Bay Lightning. So they will be very dangerous again. Some of the notable offseason moves: the Pittsburgh Penguins probably made the biggest splash, trading for Erik Karlsson, who is the reigning Norris Trophy winner for best defenseman. He actually had over 100 points last season. First defenseman to do that since Brian Leach in the mid 90s. It was really a bounce back season for Carlson. He had a couple down years, and he's in his 30s now. But Penguins are looking to make one more push while they still have Crosby and Malkin, close to their prime, but they're certainly getting up there in age. And then, Nashville Predators signed Ryan O'Reilly, who was finished last year with the Maple Leafs, so they're making some moves. It should be an interesting season. I expect some teams like the Ottawa Senators, Buffalo Sabres could be starting to make a jump here. Hopeful that my Detroit Red Wings can at least be in the playoff hunt. We'll see. We've had some pretty rotten luck in the draft lottery, so we haven't been able to pick as high as we would want to, but we have some talent coming up through the ranks. But so we can go through picks. I figure we'll pick division winners, and then we can just go with the Stanley Cup champions. So I kind of like the way Charlie did it with the NFL. We might just go one division at a time and go around the horn. Everybody pick their winner, and then we can pick our cup champions. So I'll lead us off in the Atlantic Division. I think Tampa Bay Lightning are certainly going to be one of the favorites there. But they have their starting goalie Andrei Vasilevsky is going to be injured for the first couple months of the year, so I think that could slow them out of the gate. I have the Toronto Maple Leafs taking the Atlantic. Former gopher Matthew Nyes joined their team late and into the playoffs and was a big impact player. He could be a top 6 forward early on, and so Maple Leafs also signed Tyler Bertuzzi in the offseason. So they should have a real strong team again. So I have the Toronto Maple Leafs taking the Atlantic. Benny, we'll move it to you.
I'm going to go with the Bruins. I think that they have unfinished business. Pretty embarrassing to get eliminated last year so early. And I just cannot see them not finishing in first after such a great year. It would be a shame if they just fell apart like that. So,
yeah, I would expect the Bruins to come back with a vengeance. They're superstar Patrice Bergeron did retire. He's going to go down as one of the best defensive forwards of all time. He was like a 6-7 time Selke Trophy winner. So losing him certainly will hurt, but obviously they have a ton of talent up and down the lineup. Dad, what do you think?
I'm going to go with Boston also, and my sentiment is almost exactly the same as Ben's. I think Boston is probably a little bit chafed after what happened last year. They'll probably manage the season this year. I doubt their final record will approach what it was last year for the regular season in terms of wins. But I think they'll win the division, and I think they'll set themselves up for a deep playoff run this year.
Yeah, there is something to say that, finishing with that good of a record takes a lot out of you. And so by the time you get to the playoffs, sometimes those teams tank, essentially. I mean, you've seen it a lot of times where President's Trophy winners don't win the Stanley Cup. They rarely do. The 96 Red Wings had one of the greatest seasons of all time, lost in the conference finals for the Avalanche. So it's very hard to win the President's Trophy and the Stanley Cup. It just takes so much out of you to finish first overall. John, what do you think?
You raised a really good point. We talk about burning out when you play that well. I look at the Milwaukee Bucks last year in the NBA, but best team in the NBA, best record. They go into the playoffs, the team to beat, they win the opener, then they drop the next 3-4 games, boom, and they're out. So I think there is a burnout factor, and it's hard to maintain that strong level. But I do like the fact that Boston's got sort of a chip on their shoulder. Also for me, I like Boston because they're a team I knew a lot about years ago. Very first professional hockey game I went to was in Boston Garden, and man, that was a great time. That was sensational. The energy in there, their fans, that's an intimidating environment. That is a great environment or at least it was the old Boston Garden to watch a hockey match. So I'm going with Boston.
Yeah, and the Atlantic is just loaded. I mean, that's part of what makes it difficult for the Red Wings when you also have the Florida Panthers, who we didn't even bring up, who are defending Eastern Conference champions. And yeah, the Sabres and the Senators, as I said, should be on the rise. So Atlantic Division is just going to be brutal. So moving to the Metropolitan, I do like the Pittsburgh Penguins to kind of take some of the energy of picking up Erik Karlsson. I mean, between Erik Karlsson and Chris Letang, they're going to have probably the best offensive defenseman dynamo in the league. If everybody stays healthy, which is the big key, because they do have an older roster, I think they're going to be pretty scary. They still have a real good goalie in Tristan Jarry. So I like the Penguins to win the Metropolitan, but that could certainly get interesting. Benny, what do you think?
I will also go with the Penguins. I think Sidney Crosby, this is sort of his last few years. I mean, he's getting up there now, which is kind of scary considering I remember when he first came into the league. In fact, my hockey jersey number was 87 because of Sidney Crosby. Paul Kariya's number 9 was not available, and so I just knew Sidney Crosby was a really good upcoming star. And I thought this would be a cool number to have and wear. And ironically, the jersey colors of the St. Joseph Griffins were also almost identical to the Penguins. So worked out pretty well with that. But yeah, I just feel like this is a good time for the Penguins to try to make another run. So.
All right, Dad, what do you think?
This division seems like a free-for-all towards the top to me. I'm inclined to go with the Devils. They look to me like they're coming together last year pretty well and will carry some momentum into this season.
Yeah, the Devils have a really good young roster. They could be really scary. I mean, you got the Hughes brothers and Nico Hischier. It wouldn't surprise me if they finish first in the East. I mean, they have that young talent that could really develop and just kind of take over this year. So that's a pretty good pick. What do you think, John?
I'm going with guys who are tried and true, and I know he's getting up there, but I like Crosby. So, that's where I'm going. I'm going with him, the Penguins.
Very good. And then you also gotta watch out for the Carolina Hurricanes. They made some moves in the offseason as well. Made it to the Eastern Conference Finals last year. They should be real strong again. But Metropolitan Division, always interesting. Obviously, Alex Ovechkin with the Capitals. He's closing in on Wayne Gretzky's goal record. He's probably 2 seasons away. And so once that starts to get close, that's going to be the biggest story in sports. So moving on to the Western Conference now in the Central Division. Few different teams here I think could take it, but personally I'm going with the Colorado Avalanche, which pains me to say as a Red Wings fan. But they had some injuries last year. Cale Makar missed some time. Gabriel Landeskog. They're just absolutely loaded still. So I think the Colorado Avalanche are definitely the team to beat in the Central. Benny?
I'm going to go with the Stars. They seem like a team that's up for another run, and I can see them winning the division. So, yeah.
So I think the Hockey News has the Dallas Stars in the Stanley Cup Finals. They're going to be absolutely loaded again. They have some aging players too, but they're pretty good up and down the lineup. They have good balance.
Yeah, Hockey News copied me. I remember hearing about that actually. So.
Dad, what do you think?
I'm inclined towards the Avalanche. They showed an awful lot last year, and if they stay healthy, I think they've got a great chance.
All right, John?
Well, about a mile from where I'm sitting right now, there's a hockey rink here in Monroe. And the Colorado Avalanche is their sheet, their boards from that hockey rink when they won the championship are right here in Monroe, and they're being used by Monroe kids throughout the winter. Wow. That said, I'm not going with the Avalanche. I brought up Chicago before. That's the one place I can drive to and I can see a game. And I think outside of Boston, I thought that was the other really super fun place to go watch an NHL game. Really great energy in there, and they're due. They're to snap back and make some noise this year.
Yeah, if they win the division, that would be you looking at a Connor Bedard. I mean, he's definitely the favorite to win Rookie of the Year. But yeah, if they find a way to make the playoffs, even that would be scary. Look out. Nashville Predators could certainly make some noise there as well with some of their pickups, and they still have the great goalie UC Saros. So moving on to the Pacific Division, I got to go with the defending Stanley Cup champs, Vegas Golden Knights. You know, being in Vegas, I think they're going to be somewhat immune to the hangover. They're used to that. So I liked Vegas getting right back at it and taking that division. A lot of talent. Jonathan Marchessault had a huge playoffs. I think Golden Knights is definitely the team to beat there. Benny, what do you think?
Well, obviously, this is a division that's really, really competitive with the Oilers and the Vegas Knights. However, you know, those two teams, despite their success, I think they lack a certain togetherness. And if there's one thing I know since my childhood, it is that ducks fly together. And so I'm going to go a little quack, quack. And I think the Ducks are going to come out with all this young talent. And they're going to win this division, make the playoffs. Because ducks fly together. Everyone remember that.
Well, that would certainly open some eyes. I mean, they do have a lot of young talent. They have mostly underperformed, but they just re-signed Trevor Zegras, I saw, to a 3-year deal. So, I mean, and they have a goalie. John Gibson's good. So if those young kids can finally get their wings, then yeah, maybe they can make some noise. We'll see. Dad, what do you think?
I'm going with Edmonton. You know, I thought hard about Vegas, and Vegas might be a playoff juggernaut. I don't think Vegas is as consistent over a regular season, and I think Edmonton is. I think we saw them starting to gel last year, and with the kind of talent, you know, McDavid and Draisaitl and so forth, they're going to be just formidable this year, and a bit more mature.
Yeah, Oilers are definitely going to be in the mix. As long as they have McDavid, they're going to be in the mix. And, you know, he put up like 153 points last year, which was ridiculous. If he can, the thing you wonder is there another level for McDavid? Can he even go past that? But yeah, if they can get some consistent goaltending and defense, you know, the Stanley Cup is there for it. So, John, what do you think?
You know, I'm going to use just the opposite logic that your dad just used. I'm thinking that sometimes that consistency doesn't help you when it comes to playoff time. Maybe I don't know why, but just it doesn't always seem to pan out that way. So I'm going to go the inconsistent guys from Vegas, and I think they're going to wind up on top.
Yeah, wouldn't surprise me at all. And another team that could come out of nowhere when they came way out of nowhere last year, Seattle Kraken. They were a playoff team last year for the first time. A lot of young talent. Another team of, you know, misfits, like the Golden Knights were. A bunch of guys taken in the expansion draft, and they've developed a pretty strong roster. So Seattle Kraken could come out of nowhere and shock everybody too. So with all that, we'll go to our Stanley Cup champion picks. Might as well. I think a lot of people are not going to be talking as much about the Tampa Bay Lightning. I think they're going to get off to kind of a slow start because they're going to have some injury trouble with their starting goalie. But that extra rest for the starting goalie might help come playoff time. And that roster is still really loaded, very experienced. So I think we could see the Tampa Bay Lightning getting another Stanley Cup. Benny?
Well, you know, it's very tempting to say the Ducks, but I will hold off for this year, and I will say the Bruins. So,
all right, Boston Bruins. Yep, I could certainly see that. Dad?
I'm torn between the Bruins and the Oilers here at the end. I am inclined to go with the Oilers. I just think there's a spark there, and if it's going to happen in Edmonton, this could be the year.
Yeah, and that could be the year for Canada too. It's been a long time.
That's for sure.
1993 was the last time a Canadian team won the Stanley Cup. How ridiculous is that?
Yeah.
John, what do you think?
Well, I don't know who's going to win it. I just know it's not going to be a team from Canada. It's been a long drought, and I just don't see it changing. There's a psychological barrier here that Canadian teams just can't seem to get through. So I'm kind of like, looking at my picks, I'm thinking, geez, is it Boston? Is it Chicago? Well, since Benny took Boston, I just can't agree with him. So anyway, I'm gonna go with the Blackhawks. It's a bit of a surprise, but I think they're gonna take this.
Okay, that I think a Stanley Cup bet on the Blackhawks would pay off pretty well if that panned out. So
you remember, you heard it here first.
That's right. And hey, if it doesn't happen, nobody's gonna remember anyway. So
That's right. That's right.
Shoot for the stars.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So should be an exciting 2023-24 NHL season.
So
looking forward to it, guys. It's gonna be fun.
Before we move on to the next segment, I did want to give a little bit of a brief update on our prediction standings. And we've had a few results come in. For example, when it comes to MLB division winners, as well as MLS conference champions, did want to point out that me, Charlie, and my dad both got 4 out of 6 correct for MLB division winners. And then in terms of MLS picks, Dad was 2 for 2, and Bobby and I were 1 for 2. So the way the standings are now shaken out in terms of who's had the most correct predictions so far, Bob has 22, Charlie has 20, Bobby has 18, Nick has 15, I have 14, and John has 13. So, whew.
So the MLS, is that already decided?
Yeah, they've now St. Louis and Cincinnati.
They've clinched already. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I figured they had pretty big leads.
Yep. So,
well, as they say, fortune favors the bold.
Well, not so far. So
maybe not. Okay. All right. Well, let's close things out with some individuals' takes on sports and what you guys are seeing out there in the sports world. Benny, as long as we got you want to kick us off here?
Yeah, so really it's been kind of a whirlwind since we've last had an episode. I mean, the number of fairly significant headlines, I think, have been piling up. A few things come to mind. I'm typically the person talking about soccer in this segment. And the thing that's, I think, been most interesting to me is, Lionel Messi has been hurt. And Inter Miami and the MLS in general are not disclosing what exactly is wrong with him, and something that seems pretty sketchy for a professional sports league. This would not happen in the NFL or NBA or NHL. And people are buying tickets because they keep advertising Messi could play, and then he never does. He hasn't played for 3 straight games now, and it's going to be 4 pretty soon here in Chicago tomorrow, I think. And people aren't sure. There's been some rumors that he might have tore his hamstring, but no one really knows, and they're not telling anyone. And yet people are, splurging on tickets, hoping to see him play. So it's a bad look, I think, for Inter Miami and MLS overall. This could be something that they're really botching what could have been a really good thing going, not because of just bad luck, but just because of the way they're handling it as well. So that's pretty disturbing to see. In terms of NBA news, the Celtics and the Milwaukee Bucks have both made major trades. The Bucks now have Damian Lillard, and the Celtics just got Drew Holiday, adding with Porzingis. Now the Celtics now have 5 guys in their starting lineup. Every guy in the starting lineup has had seasons where they've averaged over 20 points. So it's pretty ridiculous. And probably the most powerful offensive Celtics team I think I've seen since probably the Big 3 era with Allen, Garnett, and Paul Pierce. Other thing is, if as a Jets fan, Aaron Rodgers, obviously have to mention that 4 plays into his debut with the Jets and tears his Achilles, and now he's out for the season. This, I think, summarizes Jets football history since I've been alive. Just unbelievable how much trauma you go through as a Jets fan, especially when it comes to quarterbacks. You start to think that maybe the football gods do not like the Jets, and there'll be a lot of evidence at this point. And Zach Wilson, I'm not too confident in. Last kind of thing I want to point out when it comes to the NFL season, though, which I would love to get Bobby's opinion on, especially, is this new sort of potential soap opera between Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift. I'm curious, will this relationship pan out? That's my question for Bobby. And if it does, is he going to get a Taylor Swift Chiefs jersey with the number 87 on it and become a Swiftie for life?
Yeah, so I don't know if there's too much I can add to that hasn't already been said. It's been covered pretty intensely. NFL obviously loves it. I think the Chiefs love it. Things are going pretty well for Travis Kelce. Yeah, I don't have any issues with it. I'm totally fine with all the attention and everything the Chiefs are getting. So as long as it doesn't impact Travis Kelce's play on the field in a negative way, then I'm all for it. I have no issue with it at all. So ultimately, I think it's been good for the NFL. It's good for the Chiefs, good for Travis Kelce. So win-win-win.
All right, hopefully, as long as they don't break up, that could have a serious impact on the season.
Yeah, so if they just need to ride it out until the end of the season, if something like that's going to happen, do it in the off season, where it's not going to impact us.
Yeah, the Chiefs barely got by the Jets, so I'm not sure if you're too confident with the receiving core. It seems like they're having to spread the load around quite a bit. Also, you guys got there are some holding calls that were not called that game.
Other than Travis Kelce, we don't have 1,000-yard receivers ever. No. We just spread it around, and Patrick Mahomes finds a way to make it happen because he's the best. So we have some guys step up. Pacheco had a huge game. It's usually somebody different every game, and the defense obviously has become good. So I like the way Nick Wright kind of describes things. I think he might be the greatest sports commentator and analyst in the history of the world. He's a Chiefs fan, and his show is just great. And he just kind of mentioned, it's the first several games are just kind of practices for the Chiefs until we play the Dolphins. We're just practicing. So this last game, Mahomes was practicing his touch pass. Obviously, he needs to work on it a little bit. He had a couple picks, but we just find a way to win. We're just kind of practicing, going through the season until we get to the playoffs, and then we turn things on. So I'm not worried. We might go 19-1. We'll see. But I guess if it's my turn now, I'll move to my other things. College hockey starts this weekend, so that'll be fun to get that going. The preseason poll is out. Top 5 teams that are ranked in order. You got Boston University, Quinnipiac, Minnesota, Denver, and Michigan are the top 5. Seems like the people doing these polls are usually kind of lazy as far as the research. There's not a lot of thought that goes into it. It seems like 4 of those teams were in the Frozen Four last year. I know Quinnipiac lost some guys. There's no way. I mean, they'll probably be good again, but there's no way in hell they're going to the Frozen Four again, as far as I'm concerned. Minnesota, and if they do, we're going to steamroll them. Gophers will be good. We lost Logan Cooley. That was unfortunate, but we'll be loaded again. But I think a team that could come out of nowhere as far as how they did last year is Boston College. They're loaded with talent. I'm not sure why they aren't in the top 5. They got a lot of draft picks on their team, so they'll be really good. But yeah, college hockey, always fun. That's getting started this weekend. Wisconsin could be good soon. I'm not sure they're going to be ready this year, but Mike Hastings, I think, is going to turn that team around quickly. In 2-3 years, I'd say Wisconsin's going to be scary. And then, one other note I had just today, actually, Minnesota Twins finally won a playoff game. They had lost 18 straight, dating back to 2004. And today they beat the Blue Jays. So they are up 1-0 in their best of 3 series in the wild card.
Okay. Bob Sr., what you got?
Just another note back to the Orioles, who I was following while in Armenia on online radio, and they, for a team that didn't come from behind ever in the 9th inning during the regular season, I think they did it 3 times in the final week, and there were 2 epic battles, one against Tampa and one against Houston. Well, the Orioles were trying to lock up both the division title and best record in the American League. They were successful. But anyway, there's an interesting wrinkle that baseball has here at the end of the season. Gunnar Henderson, one of the Orioles' sensational rookie players, locked up the American League Rookie of the Year honor. And here's the interesting wrinkle. The Orioles gain an additional first-round draft pick as a result of that. And at first blush, one wonders, why would the rich get richer in a situation such as that? And the reason is that they want to encourage teams to bring top rookies out early in the season so that they get that full year of service. Otherwise, there's a temptation to hold them back just a little bit and not start the clock on the years of service. So as it works out, the Orioles, who already have the best minor league system in baseball and still have 3 top 10 minor league prospects, and whose AAA team in Norfolk just won the AAA World Series, the Orioles will now have the benefit also of 3 first-round picks in the upcoming draft. So what else can GM Mike Elias do right this year?
Well, I think it's great that the Oriole farm system is back where it had been before, and it's being, I'll say, held up by not trading away the young stars.
Yeah.
For years and years, the Orioles would just trade away a good thing, and they'd have a monstrous payroll. They'd have absolutely nothing to show for it. So I hope this bodes well for the Orioles in the future. It's like one of those things is you get a perfect setup here. Don't screw it up.
Yeah.
And gee, Bobby, I hope you're right about Wisconsin hockey snapping back. Mike Hastings has a pretty good resume. At least the college level, he's had pretty good teams, and so far he's saying the right things back here in Wisconsin. But I look back to Tony Granato not that many years ago, and Badgers really thought they had found the guy. And Tony Granato is a wonderful, great, super nice guy. It just didn't pan out, and I don't think anybody can really totally understand why that is. We were listening hear a little bit about what Benny and Bobby had to say about Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce. I really like what Coach Belichick had to say. That was that Travis Kelce's had a lot of great catches, but this by far is the biggest one. So let's hope he can hang on to it. I hope he doesn't mess this one up. I see his jersey sales are up by 800% since this romance started. So he's got something going on there. And interesting, Taylor Swift has roughly 50% more active fans than the entire NFL. So you think the NFL doesn't love this romance? It's bringing a lot of younger females to the televisions on Sunday afternoons and Sunday evenings to watch the NFL, and that certainly brings more young males who buy the light beers, whatever else. So this has been a real bonanza from a financial standpoint when it comes to the NFL. We had a little discussion here too about the Jets and what's going on there. Well, the rumor mill has it that Aaron Rodgers is rehabbing 5 hours a day, and he plans to come back, try to rejoin the team after the week 7 bye, and hoping that he can get back yet this year to play. Now, that would be shocking when you consider the type of injury he has, which indeed is career ending and certainly season ending for most all athletes. But if he could pull that off, that would be remarkable. He's just pushing the Jets to really, fight hard, keep that defense working well, so they can sneak their way into the playoffs with a late season run if he is indeed healthy. That would be quite fantastic if he could actually do that. From what the limited amount I know about that type of injury, that would be unheard of. I hope it happens, but that sounds like a long shot. And finally, and Benny brought this up too, that was that big trade or series of trades that really want to benefiting both the Celtics and the Bucks. Certainly back here in Wisconsin, and a lot of NBA folks think that, boy, you paired Giannis with Dame Lillard, and you got it. That this is the team in the NBA to beat, even though the Celtics have loaded up, including adding Drew Holiday, which was a real fan. He was a real fan favorite back here in Milwaukee. So that'll be fun to watch where that goes. I get a little trouble that Giannis demanded this sort of trade, or he would lose interest in playing in the city of Milwaukee. But I think that's just era that we live in. And Giannis has been wonderful to the city of Milwaukee, and he's been very humble. By the same token, there's the will to win, and these guys understand they can't do it on their own. So they put a lot of pressure and expectations on management to pair them with players that can make it happen. Okay. So any last word for anybody here tonight?
I think that's up to you, Charlie or John.
All right. I want to call it a wrap then, guys. It was a good one. We covered a lot of things tonight. So I want to thank all of our viewers out there. We'll be posting this episode and many more to come. Thanks, everyone.